All right, now we're recording. Okay, so pretend I did that whole intro again for the recording. So the first thing to do, and an obvious one, read your bylaws. Um, they're sitting there, they exist, I'm sure, I hope they exist anyway. And a lot of times the bylaws can be very long and wordy and a lot of things going on in there that nobody knows is happening. So really, before you can update them, you need to know what they currently say. Um, Try to get an idea of how they're organized. Are there meaningful sections? Are there sections that somebody just kind of threw in there? Um, Big thing, do they contain procedures your chapter hasn't done in years and nobody knows why that even was put in there in the first place? Are there repetitions? Is there one section where it tells you what exec officers there are, and then a different one where they're listed a second time that's just filling up space? Do sections contradict each other? Do you have one place where it says that contracts are voted on at the end of the semester, one place that says they're voted on at the beginning of the semester, and nobody's going to be able to know what the heck they're doing because, which one do you listen to? Are there repetitions? Is everything that's in there strictly necessary? Your bylaws should not be like a 30-page document. They should be something that somebody can go to. Obviously, you're not going to read it the whole thing front to back every time you need to look something up, but there's really not much that a chapter level bylaws need to cover that would need to be that long. So number two, if you're going to update it, obviously your bylaws should have a way to amend them already written in there. And you need to know that, obviously, and you need to know, especially if you're taking on a big project of like fully rewriting, you need to know if that process is something that you can do easily. So you need to know voting requirements. Obviously, you need to have quorum at any meeting where you're voting on bylaws, which I believe is more than half for pretty much any chapter. Your brothers obviously need to be there. You need to check the language on it because sometimes maybe your bylaws say that you need 2/3 of all active brothers to vote yes on something to change it. Obviously, if you only get 57% of your chapter to show up to an average meeting, you're going to have trouble amending something. Is there a waiting period written in there? Do you need to present it and wait a week or 2 weeks or however long? Because if you're getting towards the end of a semester and you have all these changes you're trying to push through and suddenly you realize you need 2 weeks you don't have, that's a bad time to figure that out. Do you need to present it in writing ahead of time? Do the brothers, maybe your bylaws say your brothers need a paper copy of any amendment because this was written in 1986 and nobody ever thought you could just email them to everybody the day of. And no, I know my chapter wanted to do this all the time. You can't just pick and choose when the bylaws exist or make up a new vote to change when the bylaws work. So if you're going to be amending them, you need to follow the policies that you have. Now, if you're at the beginning of a big process and you look at those policies and you say, this is obnoxious, who would ever do this? Then you need to follow those obnoxious policies once to change that process so that you make the rest of everything else easier for yourself. And then once you're getting into actually writing down things, you want a wide array of opinions, not just talking like what you typically think of when you think diversity. I'm saying you want to have different chapter viewpoints. You want to have new initiates who are coming in, have never seen the chapter really operate, so they have their own ideas. You want to have quote unquote old brothers who have been there 5 or 6 semesters, who have seen everything, know how things are actually done, so that if you're trying to write like this is how we do elections, then you're actually doing what the chapter's done or wants to do in the future. Obviously, you want to have exec members in there because they're the people who have agreed to put a lot of their time into running the chapter, and thus are working with the chapter a lot day to day. But you also want your brothers at large. You need people who maybe this semester APO isn't thing number one for them, but obviously those sort of brothers still deserve to have input, and they're going to bring a viewpoint that maybe if you've held an exec position every single semester that you've been there, then maybe you think that your contract requirements could be higher or stuff like that. And I put associates in parentheses because I know every chapter has different like a different definition of what an associate brother is. At Case, our associates basically completed half of a contract every semester because they had a lot of other things going on. They couldn't get service hours, but they're still your brothers. And they're obviously going to know a lot better how their life goes as a brother than maybe you are as yourself in your exec position. Am I going too fast? Is everybody still with me? Cool. I know I talk fast sometimes, so there will be plenty of time for questions at the end. This is a big one, and this is one where you have to remember, use your resources in a way of, A, if you have questions, but also there are certain things in the national bylaws, there are certain things in the policy manual that you are required to do as a chapter. There are some very obscure things that nobody knows are really in there except for the people you might be talking to. Talk to your alumni. If you know somebody like me who just graduated 2 years, how it's been for, I don't know. The last year's been 5 years, it's fine. Alumni, if you know the person who last worked on the bylaws, great, reach out to them. If you know alumni, if you've just had a big turnover in your chapter and you've got a lot of people who haven't seen it run for a while, reach out to maybe a past chapter president, see what they were doing, all that good stuff. Definitely include your advisors. I know we had a couple times at Case where we were getting into things and nobody had even told the advisors we were planning on making big changes to the bylaws. And so your advisors are going to know all of those things when it comes to, or at least they'll hopefully know some more of those things when it comes to national bylaws, stuff like that. Just like your section staff. As you go up the ladder, obviously people are going to know who else in the section or the region does bylaws stuff. There are a lot of great people. There are people who were lawyers for 30 years and now just volunteer with APO because that's what they do. And they're going to know a hell of a lot more than even me. You have a lot of great resources there. Nerds like me. There always seems to be like one person who gets way too into the bylaws at any time in the chapter. And so you have lots of chapters right nearby you with lots of people like that who can help you. That is the website. I sort of started digging into it. It's kind of weirdly organized, but you can find the national bylaws there with a little bit of work, the national policy manual, all those things that you need. So KISS stands for Keep It Simple, and I'll let you guys fill in the last S. You want your bylaws to be understandable to anybody who comes along in 5-10 years and reads a passage for the first time. And you've been gone off doing adult things for a while at that point. They're maybe not going to be able to come back and talk to you. So you want to be concise and you want to be organized when you're putting together your bylaws. Like I said, repetitions, contradictions, all stuff you're trying to avoid, obviously. And then this is a big one, and one I know that I personally struggled with. Especially your chapter president probably has their chapter meetings planned out. Basically, depending on the president, could be at the beginning of the semester. They have planned out every single date what we're going to do in chapter. And so if you suddenly come to them and say, hey, I need a full meeting to go over all these bylaws changes. And they say, well, we can't do that. We have to vote on the budget this meeting, or we have to do all sorts of different things that they have planned ahead of time. So make sure you're working with your chapter president or whoever might be scheduling your meetings ahead of time. Obviously, if you're making big changes, you're not going to be able to go through the wording of everything in the hour or whatever you have in chapter. So you want to make sure you're sending out everything you've got ahead of time. Let people read the whole thing at their own pace. Everybody has classes, everybody has tests. They're not going to be able to just have a free weekend suddenly. So make sure you're giving them plenty of time and be open to feedback. Obviously, at this point, you know the amendment process, but you need to make sure the rest of the chapter does as well. You need to make sure people know why quorum is important. Make sure people know what the discussion process is ahead of voting, what the actual voting process is. If you're just going to do it by a voice vote, if you're going to have blind ballots, if it's something that maybe there's a little bit of more heated discussion about, and you don't want people to have their vote affected. Like I said, big changes can take a full chapter meeting or more. If you're rewriting a 30-page document into an 8-page document, that's a lot of text to cover if you need to show the chapter every single word that is being changed. Allow time, have some fun in the middle of that meeting, because if you're standing up, I have been up there talking just bylaws nonsense for half an hour, and you can see half the chapters doing homework and the other half is asleep. So leave some time for discussion to keep people engaged. Bring a snack. People love snacks. I know when we did our big presentation, we had a lot of fun GIFs in there. I don't care if anybody cares about how I pronounce that. It's fine. Just to keep things interesting, keep people engaged. It is a dull topic in general, a lot of people believe, and so you're just going to need to bribe people with pet pictures to get them to pay attention. If you're doing full rewrites, break it down into sections. Don't just throw everything at everybody and then say, does anybody have any questions on everything? Say like, all right, these are the types of brothers we have in our chapter. This is the text. Does anybody have any questions, concerns? Do we need to amend this at this moment? Do it slowly so that people have a chance to actually think about what they're voting on. Obviously, allow time for discussion. I know by the time I was presenting bylaws, I had been living with that document for 3 months. I knew everything it said. It was super simple. I knew exactly what was in there, why it was in there, and sometimes when you're that intimately familiar with something, you just kind of assume everybody else can pick it up easily. So yeah, make sure plenty of time for questions, discussion, all that. And remember, you want this done right. You want to make sure that there isn't a brother in there that felt like their voice wasn't heard. There wasn't someone who feels that the vote was taken unfairly. There isn't someone who doesn't understand what was just voted in. Like I said, this can take more than a full chapter meeting. Just make sure you're working with the people who are scheduling that stuff to make sure that all of that is accounted for. Follow your processes. Don't just skip ahead because it's easier. Because if you just start picking and choosing which parts of the bylaws you're going to follow at what time, then really, what's the point of all the time you've just spent rewriting them? And then I don't know how many of you have done leads, but a big thing is smarter goals. APO tacks the ER onto the end of SMART goals because they just have to. And so remember, even once you've done all of this, you just spent 3 months and too many hours and too many chapter meetings doing your bylaws, thinking about only bylaws. Once that's all done, you still need to evaluate, how's it working? Is it working the way we intended? Did we put in something that the chapter just threw away a month later and really doesn't need to be in there? Did we put in something that's making it harder than we thought to exist? And obviously then revise. Bylaws are a living document. I know I sometimes struggled with feeling possessive of the bylaws because I had spent so much time working on them. They're going to change. The chapter is going to change in your time in it, in your time after the chapter. Everything's going to be changed. You want to make sure that what you leave behind works for the chapter that you're in, and that what you leave behind is able to be changed for when the chapter changes after you're gone. And so I talked really fast. So here are the promised pet pictures. This is our small zoo. So there is a lot of time left for questions. Anything you want to know about life, the universe, bylaws. There's my contact information. I check out my Facebook messages all the time, emails every day. If you manage to find another Rory Bloechl on Facebook, I will be very impressed and I want to know about it. I think you should be able to find me. So does anybody have any questions at this time? Yes.
Okay, I wanted to make sure I wasn't like stepping on anybody's toes. So I guess this is kind of like a situational based question and basically the reason why I'm here. So I'm the VP of leadership, but I was also the new member educator.
Okay.
And this semester, our chapter had an issue where we had a new member that was, putting it lightly, like harassing active brothers and trying to get them to do like things for the new member,
Okay.
Putting it very lightly.
Okay.
So we brought it to our advisors and they told us that we as the new member educators weren't allowed to ask that potential new member to leave the chapter because there was no grounds in the bylaws that would allow us to do so. So I guess I wanted to see your input or anybody else on this call to see, like, do you have anything in place? Like if a potential new member is like not living our values or being sus, I guess, to our current members, like what do you do in that situation?
I know when we did our bylaws, we already had it. We just sort of clarified it. We had there is a process in cases bylaws, at least, to suspend a brother or to also in a different case, remove an exec member from office. You want it. Yeah. If you're going to take that drastic a step, you do want to make sure that you have it codified in your bylaws. I believe for suspending a brother, it was something ridiculous, like you bring the issue to the chapter president or an advisor if you're not comfortable with the president, obviously. The advisors and the president meet, exec meets on it separately, exec has to vote to continue, it's brought to the whole chapter. Just make sure that it is, like your advisor said, you want to have something laid out ahead of time that everybody has had at least the chance to take a look at. In the case of potential new members, it might be a little more difficult. Obviously, you can, I believe there are ways, they do have to be invited to initiate into the chapter. I know our chapter voted on that, had to vote on that.
Okay. So the potential new member actually ended up being uneligible or ineligible due to credit requirements. So they were asked to leave anyway, but it was kind of like we never got to address the real reason why they were not allowed. So, but yeah, the current new member educators and myself are working on a bylaw proposal to hopefully help us out so that something like that doesn't happen again. It was stressful.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Michaela, is that?
So I have a question kind of going with that. So like I was gonna say, like for ours, we do have a judiciary board, like how Liam said. So like would like if you have a judiciary board set up, like a J board, going off of like risk management and following like risk management from nationals, would that be basically underneath like the judiciary board if they have that set up?
Yeah, if you have something like that set up, really it's up to whatever works best for your chapter, and making sure that that board has, obviously it has certain powers. Make sure the chapter knows what those are and that those are written down somewhere, so that if that board gets to the point where you're trying to suspend a brother because they're not compatible with the chapter anymore, you're not the issue of having it not be available.
Now I'm currently looking at ours just to like see what it says.
And you'll have a lot of resources from your university as well, I'm sure, if it,
yeah,
because what Maddie was saying sounded like it might have risen to the level of having to go to a university, like a Title IX office, lots of fun stuff like that
yeah,
we had to deal with at one point. There are a lot of people on your campus, in your section staff, in your region staff, who would very much like to help you if you get to a point where you're lost or you're having trouble.
thank you.
Yep. Rachel, yes.
Yeah, I wondered if you had any input on how to sort of regulate a discussion period so that it stays respectful and professional. So we've had issues at our last bylaw review and also at elections the past 2 years with people taking personal attacks on other members.
So that's going to be down to how you run your Roberts rules, obviously. Like I said, you want to have that all. I really guess the best way is to have it written out ahead of time. Take the time to make sure your members know what crosses the line, what doesn't. If it would continue to be a problem, maybe look at amending your election process. I know we had some discussions when I was active of possibly cutting discussion time or limiting it in some way for elections. You need to make sure that whoever's running the discussion, people respect that, and people know that you might have to escalate to be there being consequences if the same person is a repeat offender.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else at the moment? Back on the pet slide. Yeah, I mean, as part of your updating bylaws process, you want to try to sort of think of what sort of scenarios like that could happen, which is where it's good to rely on older brothers, advisors who have sat through the last 10 years of elections in your chapter specifically, or have seen brothers have issues that needed to be taken to a university level, anything like that. Any other questions. Doesn't have to be about bylaws. Just chat. I talked faster than I planned on, so we got a lot of time.
Do you have a favorite pet?
Well, now that would just be unfair.
I hope you saw my comment in the chat. I said I'm requesting for you to get a leopard gecko.
I think we're on pause for the number of animals we're going to have in the house for now. I will say I grew up as a big dog person, but have since come to love the cats since I started dating my now wife, because she had Casey when we started dating, and we got Teddy. We were very happy when we finally bought a house to have a yard a dog could be in. You don't know anything about axolotls. Axolotls are very cool animals. That's what Pluto is.
So if
Well,
no one has a bylaws question right now, can I ask how you named all the animals?
We just kind of spitballed back and forth. I think the best/worst story is we were talking about getting the rats, and I think the name I started with was like Tobiathan, just to have, because I am a fan of an animal having a very long, ridiculous name that an animal should never have, and then you shorten that to what you're actually going to call them. That got changed to now his real name is Toboggan, and the other rat is Bobsled. So they are Toby and Bobby. Archie or Archimedes is named after the owl in some movie that I never remember. Sword in the Stone, I have been yelled at. I don't know how we ended up on Pluto. Sven is obviously after the reindeer from Frozen. And Teddy is some mixture of teddy bear and going back to the fact that I just like a cat named Theodore. Any other questions? Anybody want to share more of their own experience with bylaws? Because I found that just having more stories that you've heard, any obscure things you found in your bylaws that you have no idea why they're in there. Oh yeah, Bobby.
Hello. Yeah, first off, thank you for this presentation. It was very helpful.
Yeah.
I was just writing some stuff down, but yes, thank you for all of this. But I principally wanted to ask, like, I'm a pledge at Ohio State's Alpha Iota chapter. So like bylaws were a new thing for me this semester, and I needed to quickly digest like a ton of all of these rules and procedures, like in a pretty I guess expedient fashion, to say the least, just since like there were all these like things being, I guess, rules that needed to be followed for elections that had just happened previously, and we even have more elections coming up and all that. So I guess just like throughout your experience, like because we have bylaw review coming up in the coming year, like I guess just general advice to like make the bylaws in general like seem really approachable.
Mhm.
Like ways to, I guess, just communicate them instead of just slapping a PDF full of black text on white background with short line space in between. Like just some ways to present the bylaws to new members that like would be easy to digest.
I know in my experience, what I tried to do was more tell people what was in there rather than show them the full text. So that you're saying, so section 1 says, this is who can join the chapter. This is what we call them in different roles: active, pledge, associate, neophyte, yada, yada, yada. Try to keep it simple. Obviously, yeah, the less you can just throw the text up there, probably the better. It can help to have a bunch of different voices in your presentation so that people have transitions. Obviously, you're pledged, so you haven't been to probably much of the leads or anything like that. But it's something a lot of APO things like to do, where you have somebody talk for a little bit and then a discussion or a activity the chapter does, and then a different person talks, just to sort of break it up. Make sure you're focusing on what's important, getting into the nitty gritty of even stuff like that we were talking about, of how to suspend a brother. Your chapter probably in your bylaws review doesn't need to know much more than the fact that that process is there and how to go find it if they want to read it themselves.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. So like, has anyone like within, I guess, just like with your chapter, has ever like tried to make like, I don't know, like an unofficial like compressed version of the bylaws that like would just be easier to hand out in a way? I don't know how, like innate flaws with that idea aside, like just some way to quickly communicate some of that information, or like a presentation style thing.
I know when I was there, we did it in a presentation, but I mean, having a pamphlet or something like that could definitely be useful, even if it was just a card that said, here's where you find the bylaws on our shared drive or whatever. Because I know a lot of times the average chapter member, even a pledge coming in, when I was a pledge, we didn't really talk about the bylaws. The chapter just ran how it did. So yeah, just spreading more awareness, trying to find the people who sort of latch onto the bylaws also as part of that.
Okay, yeah, that was useful. Thank you. Thank you.
I did that. That's my presentation in the chat. If anybody wants to go back and just look at my slides or have the pictures of the animals. You will need to become friends with my wife, who is running her own workshop next week. She posts, or tomorrow, she posts a lot more of the animal photos on her Facebook.
Is your presentation going to be added with the recording?
It should. I have not presented on Zoom before, but I believe it should record with.
Okay. I didn't know if it was going to be like a separate entity, like if I could just like pull up like your presentation.
I put the link in the chat if you want for the Google Slides.
Oh. Thank you.
And if you ever need to get that link again, just reach out to me. Anything else? Any fun animals you guys want to share?
Sorry, it took me a second. But my cat just recently had like a really bad little stint at the vet. But when she got out of the carrier, she jumped into my arms and did
Aw.
that. And I was like, why do you love me so much? But yeah, so that's my cat. Her name's Jade. She's a tuxedo and she's got green eyes. So my little angel baby, but that's the only one I have. One day I hope to have a zoo like you.
A little scary how quickly it happened here, but you know. Some of them have just been, my wife works at a daycare and it's been like she wants to get animals for the daycare and then they tell her she can't right then, so she just gets the animals for us instead. That's how the rats showed up. I just dug up the presentation I did for just telling people what are in the bylaws, just if you want a reference.
This is actually what I was like thinking about when I was talking about like a presentation.
Yeah.
So, like this is exactly what I was thinking about. So I will use this as reference. Not full, but thank you. This is a good example.
I have a question. Would you happen to have like a copy of like your college's, well, I don't know if you still have one, but if you have one, a copy of their bylaws by chance?
I have an old copy.
Just because I would like to see others
Yeah.
for reference.
Mm-hmm.
Rory, I should have our most recent copy of our chapter's bylaws. If we're like allowed to share that, I can put it in the chat.
Yeah.
I can share ours as well. Definitely in the process of obviously updating it, but some things may be a little nice to see.
Yeah, and if you ask your section staff or your region staff, they could also help you with other chapters in the area.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
Yeah, I know pretty much anybody I've talked to wants to share their bylaws just to get feedback and help other people, which is a great thing about APO.
Then our bylaws, Case's chapter of APO is pretty small right now. We're about 25 active and associate brothers and then about 8 pledges. So these bylaws are for like a smaller chapter. Like I think we only have 8 elected exec positions. So might be some things that are a little different.
How many actives do you have again?
About 25.
35? Okay. We just had our initiation, so we were at 20 actives. We have 10 exec, and we had 9 pledges. So now it's 29 actives at the moment. So
yeah, so we're pretty similar size. This might be actually really helpful then.
Yeah, I will say a few things in here, just for like reference, like this. I feel like it does need updating the fact that like we were a large chapter at one point, and so we have kind of like lost a few little things that we used to do. So like updating those would be nice, just because like we don't, like, it says that we are supposed to participate in this thing called what is it, Song Fest, and that requires a lot of members being interested, the money with it, things like that. So that could be something to change, but because we used to be 100 people.
I will say, just on stuff like that, you should think about whether you want to have events like that in your bylaws, really. It might be better to have another document that sort of lists those, just because that can sort of get clunky. And I know a lot of chapters, the events they do turn over very quickly depending on who's in the chapter and who has what connections.
Yeah. So then we do have like a policy procedure manual,
Yeah.
so we could just put that within there.
Yeah. Procedure manual. If your service VP just has a document they keep, something. Yeah.
Okay.
Because really, like, the bylaws are a living document that you want to change, but they should be things that aren't changed that often unless there is a meaningful shift in the chapter that brings that change on. Because a lot of the times you're looking at 2/3 or 3/4 majorities, you need to change those. And so they should be things that should only really be changed if they have to be, rather than just because the person who had contact at the Ronald McDonald House happened to graduate. Now we don't do Ronald McDonald House anymore. And yeah, if you have specific questions like that, there are lots of people I can try to help you out. There are lots of people who can help you out with that. Any other sort of final questions as we're wrapping up?
I did find a picture of my chinchilla while we were talking about pets. She's turning 17 this summer, so she's a little scraggly, but
There's a chinchilla at our local pet store that I get, apparently is on sale right now, and it is very hard not to get it.
right, they can live for up to 20 years, so just make sure you're ready for that commitment.
I will recommend that everybody goes to the let me get the making post-graduation plans tomorrow at 1:30. That is being led by my wife. You may get more animal pictures or live animal appearances. Thank you all for coming. Sorry, I talked so fast. I do that a lot. Anything else you want to reach out at any point? I am here. I do not yet have an official title in an APO organization, but I am looking to get more involved. And so anything I can do to help, I am here and have plenty of time. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rory. I think this went really good.
Thanks.